Welcome to the Inside Pitch. I'm Christopher Lockhart, the creator and administrator of this private Facebook group where screenwriters, creatives, filmmakers meet to ask and answer questions and exchange ideas and information on the craft and business of movie making. When I'm not moderating a Facebook group, I am the story editor at WME, the world's first talent agency, actually the oldest, I think 128 years this year. I'm also an educator and an independent filmmaker. I don't moderate the Inside Pitch alone. I'm joined by Steve Enlow and Ramesh Santanam. And Ramesh is my co-host for these events, but I work him too hard and he needed a day off. So he is going to take a little break and we will see him next time. Hopefully I can navigate this without him. It would be like Lewis without Clark, but we'll see. So actually, my guest is here today, well, kind of because of Ramesh. So now, Charles Vignola, I had heard his name many years ago because I had a friend who worked for Jerry Bruckheimer, and he used to talk about this very enigmatic guy named Charlie. And Charlie was literally the like secret weapon to Bruckheimer. And I was always very intrigued, maybe a little jealous. And but I don't know, I mean, it just sounded, I don't know, just too mythological. But sure enough, one day I was at one of Ramesh's swanky Hollywood parties, and I'm introduced to this guy, Charles Vignola. And I'm like, wait a minute. Are you the legendary Charlie from Bruckheimer? And he was, yeah. I was like, I couldn't believe it. I was like, you really, truly exist. And so we just kind of struck it off. We actually meet once a month at Hugo's in West Hollywood. And so we've been kind of catching up on the last 30 plus years that we've missed out on with each other. He actually was on a panel that we had here a little while ago featuring studio readers. And so I said, you should come back. Let's just do, kind of you, because working for Bruckheimer is pretty cool. And he was worked on all of Bruckheimer's films and TV for the last 30 years. His last project was a small movie called Top Gun to Maverick, so if you're going to retire, that's a pretty good way to do it. And now Charlie's bringing his experience to his own platform called Script Genius, where he works with writers to develop their own material. So we'll talk about that. But here he is, Mr. Charles Vignola.
Hello, Christopher. How are you?
I am doing well. How are you doing there?
Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Well, whatever. It's a little warm today. You have your AC on there or what?
I do. Yes,
Okay.
for sure.
All
It's definitely a little warm in Southern California.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
All right. So look, let's just get down to business.
Yeah.
We're going to kind of just chew the fat a little bit, and we're joined by people from all around the world who are very curious about what's up. So they're going to have some questions for you, and
Right.
I'm going to have to navigate this all by myself without Ramesh.
Sure.
But I'm just looking. I see Stephen Hoover's here. We've got Wendy, Mark, P. Have you met P?
Not yet.
P's often at Ramesh's parties.
Oh, okay.
Frank Monteleone. Frank Monteleone. Yeah.
There we go.
There you go. So, all right. So look, let's do because when we talk, I'd just like to hear sort of your approach to story and sort of how you tear things apart and what you look at. You're really big on concept, so I want to talk about that. But we do need to do a little bit of origin story. You're going to have to perhaps spill a little tea on Bruckheimer. I mean, I know you got that NDA and all, but you can figure out ways around the margins a little bit. And but all right, so let's just go back a little bit. sort of pre-Bruckheimer, and just tell us how did you end up there?
Um, well, let's see. My origin story would have to start as I was a kid growing up in Long Island, New York, and then in South Florida. My father was a musician. My mother was a stay-at-home mom, but they encouraged creativity from a very young age. And my dad had an 8mm camera, so myself, like Spielberg, like J.J. Abrams, certainly not on the same level, made student films when I was like 15, 16 years old. And I knew that from the time that I saw Star Wars and Close Encounters, which you and I were just talking about, those were movies that just blew my mind. And I was like, I don't know how to do that, but I'd love to try to figure out how to do that. And unfortunately, I'm not a Nepo baby, so I didn't have that in. So I had to sort of figure it out from just ground zero. And so when I went to college, I wanted to, learn about screenwriting and filmmaking, things like that. And actually, and I forget about this all the time, the summer before college started, my father knew somebody who helped find extras for movies and television shows. So in the summer of 1984, there were two things that were shooting in Miami, in Fort Lauderdale. One was one of the sequels to the movie Porky's, which was shooting on the beach in Fort Lauderdale, and I was one of the high school kids in the background. And the other one was the pilot for Miami Vice. So those are the two things that were going on. But I realized that the first joke that I ever wrote that got into a movie was in Porky's Revenge. And the way it happened was I was on the beach, they were shooting some beach scenes, and I was hanging out with some of the extras who became my friends. And we buried one of the kids up to his neck in the sand. And I built this big sand body that included a big sand, let's say, Johnson on the figure. And I just thought it was kind of fun. We were being 18-year-old kids. And one of the ADs was walking past us and saw what we were doing. And he was like, wait a minute, stay right here, stay right here. And he went and grabbed James Comack, who was the director of the movie, to show him what I had built in the sand. He's like, oh, this is great, we're gonna use this. So they literally took the cameras, they lit it, they came over, they shot it, and then, I don't know, 8 months, 10 months later, when the movie finally came out, and I went to go see it with my family, that shot is in the scene, when we were establishing the beach scene. So I'm like, I consider that my first joke that ever got in a movie that I wrote when I was 18 years old.
It's something to be proud of, Charles.
Yeah, it's just that was it. And so, but I knew I wanted to write stories. My first scripts were written without even having access to screenplay format because, again, this is pre-internet, so I don't know how to make anything look right. And but during college, I started like traveling to LA during like spring break or summer break and going to Hollywood Boulevard and finding old scripts of Cheers and MASH and movies and like cardboard boxes, Larry Edmonds and Hollywood Book and Poster. So it's like, okay, that's what a real script looks like. So I gathered that. Nowadays, you guys are spoiled. Every script is online for free on sites all over the place. So there's no excuse. You know exactly how to format a script. All those are there. And when I was in college, one of the new professors was Paul Lazarus, who was a producer who had produced a couple of films, including Capricorn 1 with James Brolin and O.J. Simpson, and Westworld, which later became a big TV series that J.J. Abrams did for HBO. And so he became kind of a mentor during college and taught me sort of a lot about the business, which I was thrilled at age, 18, 19. And then I would say the big smart thing that I did completely on my own initiative, just because I didn't know any other way to do it. Summer of '87, there was a movie that came out called The Monster Squad. And it was written and directed by a guy named Fred Decker with his friend, Shane Black. And Shane was also a guy who wrote a movie called Lethal Weapon. So this was a little movie that they did that came out in summer of '87. I thought it was kind of fun. It was kind of like Little Rascals meets the Universal Monsters. And when the movie came out, I was like, and I did some reading in some of my movie magazines. Oh, this guy is in his like mid-20s, Fred. He's really young, like not that much older than me. I wonder if I could invite him to University of Miami to maybe like, screen the movie and talk to the students. But again, this is 1987. There's no internet. How do I know who represents him as an agent? I literally have no idea. So somehow, I don't remember how, but I did the legwork, found out who his agent was, called them from Miami, said, listen, I'm a kid. I'm in the Cinematic Arts Commission at the University of Miami. We'd love to have Fred come and screen his movie. We don't even have a budget to fly him out and put him up or anything, but we would love to have him if he'd love to come. And he did. He said he wanted to come. And so he came out for a weekend. We showed the movie. We, had a couple of meals together. He couldn't have been nicer. And I said, listen, I'm only a junior, but after my senior year, I'm planning on coming to LA. He's like, okay, you know what? Here's my contact information. Here's my phone number. When you get to LA a year from now, give me a call. So, a year goes by. I'm literally graduating from University of Miami. I'm driving out from the East Coast with my best friend to Los Angeles, and I kept his number. And when I got to LA, I called him. He's like, oh, we're having a party at Shane's house in Westwood with a bunch of other young, writers and filmmakers, if you want to come. So a friend of mine and I, we drove to their house on Veteran in Westwood and saw Fred and saw Shane. I had never met Shane up until that point. And a bunch of other young screenwriters, David Silverman, who went on to create The Simpsons along with, Matt Groening. And it was phenomenal. And so I kind of got to meet these people who were in Hollywood making movies and became, friends with them. And that was all because I had the gumption as a college kid to just reach out of the ether and see if maybe, somebody would come to the school. So like that was an early example, I guess, of networking before I knew the term. And ironically, the first agent I ever got, my first professional agent, was as a result of meeting Fred, then meeting Shane, then meeting a friend of Shane's who was a studio executive at Warner Brothers, who read one of my first professional scripts that I thought was good enough for people to read. And she read it and said, you know what, I kind of like this. I'm going to give this to somebody I know at United Talent, UTA. And that person turned out to be John Lesher, who was like one of the young agents at the time. He later went on to win an Oscar for Birdman, ran Paramount, but at the time, he was my first agent in the business. And that zigzagging path, that's how I got my first agent in the business. No, I didn't have any connections. I had to start making connections back then.
It sounds so daunting, right? Because again, there's no email back then. Nowadays it's not all that hard to figure out how to contact somebody. Sure, you might have to contact a representative or something, but you can find that information probably in about 2 minutes,
right,
most of the time now. So and in regard to gumption, I still think that in many ways ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
And sometimes just sort of starting out and maybe doing things, and people say, well, that's not really the way you're supposed to do it, or well, maybe it's not, but maybe you take a chance, and if you get your ear slapped back, then all right, then that's maybe not the way that I should have done it. But
I think a lot of it is attitude, right? When I was doing what I was doing, I was very humble. I was a kid. I didn't assume anybody was going to do any favors for me. I was just being very nice and very polite, and hoping that maybe they would say yes, and they did. If you take the attitude of like, everybody owes you a living, everybody should read your screenplay, everybody should jump when you say jump, and like they're jerks if they don't, you're going to be very disappointed, because they're, everybody in this business, as you know, has got like a Manhattan city scale size, scripts all over their office. Nowadays it's all online, but back in the day it was literally giant piles of scripts in your desk in your office everywhere. But every one of those scripts takes hours to read, and there's a never-ending supply. So that's just what you have to cover for the job, not your friend, not somebody that you just met. So it's not necessarily that we don't want to help people out. Sometimes it's literally logistics. We literally don't have the time to read the script or to talk. We just,
That's most often the reason why, I would say.
Yeah,
Just,
yeah,
there's just not enough bandwidth. It's
no,
funny because when you were talking about having to go to Hollywood Boulevard and buy scripts, it's like now, now there's scripts coming, out of every nook and cranny, right? And like,
yeah,
we can't get away from them quick enough. And then there's still more.
yeah.
But yet, back then we were hungry to see what scripts looked like.
No, and I think
So
that's the key, Chris. Like, back then, because we didn't have the ease, the pipeline to get all this kind of material, we had to learn ourselves. We had to figure out, how do we do this? I go to the library, are there scripts there? I fly to LA and I'm looking through dusty boxes to find scripts because they're not all over the internet at the touch of a button instantly. I'm amazed now when, and I get it to some degree because, when you're an aspiring screenwriter, you don't know anything yet, you're just starting out. But they're all available, at the touch of Google to like look and see, okay, what does a professional script look like? Almost anything that you're watching in the last couple of years, you can find the scripts online too. And you can read and say, how do they handle a montage? How do they handle a voiceover? How do they handle intercut? How do they, and sometimes they do it multiple different ways. But if you see that in any professional script, you can use that because if they use it, it's good enough for you too. You can do that. But to like say, I don't know how to do these things. Well, do a little research first. Try to do a little reading. Read as many of those scripts as possible if you really want to do this. Like, that's part of what you have to do, is immerse yourself in the craft that you're interested in, and then through osmosis and reading it all, bit by bit, you're going to start to learn a lot of stuff. How long is a scene? A couple of pages. It's not 9 pages, so it's like you'll start to get a sense of the rhythm of things, the cadence of things, how people write stage direction in kind of like a way that's succinct but vivid. Little things like that. You'll pick it up. And you do have to read the stuff. You do have to like start doing that. Yeah.
well, writers should be reading, I think, just generally speaking,
Yeah.
reading whatever, uh,
Yeah.
anything that hurts at all. Um, but yeah, now again, uh, I actually think this is why sort of part of my motive for having the inside picture, doing these sorts of interviews. It's because none of this stuff was around when we first came out, and
Right.
I, I wonder, if it had been, would things have been easier? I don't know, maybe not. This is still a pretty hard business. In fact, I'd say the business is harder now than it was even back when we first came out here. So
Sure.
I don't know. Maybe there's a little bit of a trade-off, but it is nice to be able to find the information that you need now. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And
I hope
by the
people
way,
take advantage of it.
even when I think back at like, I said that I got my first agent in the early '90s, but technically it wasn't like my first script deal. Like, I could actually say that when I was in college, my friends and I, we were writing scripts just for fun, even though we were taking screenwriting classes. Like, we would still, evenings, weekends, that's all we would do, is write scripts for our own amusement. And there was a magazine called Dramalog. I'm not sure if it still exists, but back in the day, it was like, industry magazines about the movie business, and you would find out about casting and stuff. But in the back, there were classified ads, and there were little independent production companies that were looking for screenplays. So even back then, in 1986, 87, my friends and I were writing scripts, contacting those places in the back of the classifieds, and sending scripts. And in 2 occasions, we got like a $500 option in 1987 for a script that, we just sent. Nothing ever happened with it, but it was like a company who paid us real money, for
Right,
like
right.
a year and a half option. That was kind of my first real money from screenwriting back in college.
Right.
So you could do that.
And now, of course, there is just there's a gazillion of those kinds of things all over the place, and I think it's hard to even differentiate which ones are sort of serious. And I'm not insinuating that they're scams, but just
Well,
I
some
think
some are.
some are
Certainly.
definitely scams, yes, but I think more so there's just sort of a lot of people that are maybe trying to dip their toes in the water, and they're gonna spin your wheels
Yeah.
um, in the process. And but back then it seemed like people who advertised were probably a little more serious.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I remember in college, like, even though it was like a $500 option, I was compelled to fly out to LA to meet with those people just because I wanted to see them face. If there was no Facebook there at FaceTime, there was nothing like that. So literally, I flew out to LA and met them and went to Musso and Frank, and like, I did those things back when I was in college because I was just that desperate to figure out, how do I do this? I have no avenue and I have no person who's going to introduce me to any of this. So I've got to figure it out. And by the way, most screenwriters, most professional screenwriters, I'm sure you can attest to this, they're not Nepo babies. They all had to figure this out. They all had to figure out from outside the business, how do I get in? What is that going to take? It's like, it's never easy, as you pointed out. It's never really been easy. But for the people who really, 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 really want it, they just write and they write and they write and they meet and talk to people and they read and they do everything. They eat, sleep, and breathe it in the off chance that maybe eventually I'm going to have a piece of material that'll be good enough and get into the hands of somebody who will think it's good enough to help me. And that's invariably how everybody breaks in at one point or another.
Yeah, I remember once there was this obnoxious member of our group who's no longer a member of the group. And he called me a Nepo baby because I had all these connections. And I was like, that's not what a Nepo baby is. He said, like, I came out to Los Angeles. I didn't know a soul. I'd never been here before. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a place to live. I knew nothing. And I was completely disconnected. So anything that I built from scratch. And that's not the definition of a Nepo baby. Nobody in this business gets anywhere without somebody giving them a lift up.
Yes.
It's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. I don't care who you are. Somebody, reached out a hand to pull you up somewhere.
Right.
Maybe it's somebody that you met at a party 5 years ago and you've become best friends, or maybe it's somebody who just read your work and is a fan. But that's the way it is for most people. Yeah, they don't have a parent in the business who's giving them a shot. And by the way, I always say, well, so big deal. It's like why do we complain in this business about Nepo babies? Almost every business has Nepo babies, right? My mechanic is Tony and Sons. How come nobody complains? Oh, you give your business to your sons, and
right.
It's the stupidest thing ever. It's
what's the old saying is you play the hand you're dealt.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
In other words, I don't know what cards I'm going to get starting out in terms of creativity or luck or opportunity or any of those things. So I know what I can control, which is what can I read, what can I see, who can I talk to, what can I generate. Like, those are the things I can control. Beyond that, it's just a matter of a lot of luck. Life is luck. How I met my wife is luck. So many things are luck, but it's how you play that luck. It is. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's a lot of luck, but then again, you also have to be prepared, right? So when that lucky moment comes, you're ready to strike.
Yes. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity, right? Yeah.
Yes. All right. So then, speaking of that, somehow you transitioned to Jerry Bruckheimer.
Right. Okay. So I moved out to Los Angeles in summer of '88, and again,
me too, by the way.
Yeah. So Chris and I come out here in the late '80s, and again, other than Fred Decker's phone number, I don't have any connections. I don't know what I'm doing. I literally had to buy a car for $800 cash from a elderly couple in Burbank, an old Dodge Dart to drive around. And the friend that I drove out from the East Coast to California with, he also wanted to get into the business, and he was going to be working in the mailroom at Triad, which was a talent agency.
I remember
back in the late '80s. Yes.
In fact, they eventually merged with William Morris.
Correct. So he was working at Triad. We were sharing an apartment in North Hollywood. Trust me, it's not West Hollywood or Hollywood proper. North Hollywood is different.
That was where I landed too.
Yeah, it was cheap.
My first place.
It was cheap. That's where you live. So I was living there, and through him, because he was working in the mailroom, he would bring home scripts, and I was getting to read, the scripts that were gonna be made or that they were packaging, including Ghostbusters 2, which was one of the most exciting things when he brought home Ghostbusters 2 until I read it. But you know, but and so that was amazing. But I needed a job. I needed to pay the bills, right? And so I didn't know what I could do. And one of my friends, they were both graduates of Northwestern. He said there's a company on La Cienega called the Right Connections. It's temp service. They put people with Disney and Sony and MGM. Maybe you want to go there, and maybe you could try to like get a job working, you know, as a kind of assistant or a gopher or something at one of those studios. So I went into the Right Connections, and I happened to go in there on the day they were looking to hire somebody to work in their office, not to go out to the studios, but to literally work in the office. That wasn't what I wanted to do, but I was like, I need money. So I took the job at the office. Well, as I learned, you wouldn't have necessarily made a living working as a temp because you don't work every day. And so like that was a smart move. I actually was able to pay my bills. And while I worked there were tons of young, talented, aspiring people who wanted to work in the movie business who were working as temps, some of whom I started recognizing as like actors on TV shows. And so one of my friends was like the best temp ever. He was always asked for at every studio. And he wound up finally getting a job as an assistant at Simpson Bruckheimer Films on the Paramount lot. At the time, Simpson Bruckheimer was the company that did Flashdance. They did Beverly Hills Cop. They did Top Gun. They were amongst the biggest producers in Hollywood at this time in 1989. So I asked my friend who just got the job, I said, are they looking for any readers, any story analysts? Because I knew that was one of the jobs you could kind of like get if you didn't have a lot of experience. It's like, you know, it's a low rung of the totem pole, but you're reading a lot of scripts and you're at least kind of like working in the industry at an entry level. And he's like, yeah, let me see if I can set up an interview for you with our head of development. And he did. He somehow got me in, and I had a 45-minute meeting with the head of development at the time. And he liked me personally. He thought I had good taste in movies. We got along well. And he's like, can I give you a script to take a look at over the weekend? I'm like, oh, give me a couple scripts. Whatever you got, I'll take a look at it. He gave me 6 scripts on Thursday, Friday night. And so by Sunday morning, I'm like, I should probably start reading some of these scripts and covering them. And here's the thing. I bluffed my ass off. I had never written coverage in my life. I don't even know what coverage looks like. But I had the moxie to go in there like I did. So now I'm like, what the hell do I do? So I start calling every one of my friends who has any assistant job in Hollywood and said, can you please fax me coverage. What does coverage look like? And they sent me samples of coverage. And it's, it's like a book report for a screenplay, basically. So that, the executives who are not going to have time to read the scripts can at least get some idea of whether or not they should pay attention to the screenplay. So I'm like, okay, I see the format. I think I could do this. And I read the 6 scripts. I wrote up the coverage for the 6 scripts, sent it to the studio. And within a couple of days, I got a call saying, like, we like it. We want to hire you. Like, you want to hire me to be the story analyst for Simpson Bruckheimer Films? Like, a pissant kid who's never done this in his life. This is crazy. And it was because, like, another day later, they called and said, oh, small bump in the road. There is a guild. There's a story analyst union. And before we can hire anybody who's not in the guild, we have to interview 3 non-working members of the guild. I'm like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm not going to be working for Simpson Bruckheimer because there's no way they're going to hire me with no experience compared to people who literally do this for a living, who are in the story analyst guild. And so I remember I had just gotten a job, a backup plan at a video store in Van Nuys. And the night before I'm about to start work at the video store, there's an answering machine message on my machine. We interviewed the other people. We want to hire you. So can you come into Paramount tomorrow? And on top of that, we now have to pay you union wages as opposed to what we were originally going to pay you, which is like half of that. And I was thrilled to have that. And that was it. I went to Paramount in my little 74 lime green Dodge Dart. And I started working at Paramount for Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer as the in-house reader of every script, and that's how I got my foot in the door. With complete luck.
And of course, the Simpson Bruckheimer days are kind of legendary, just for all sorts of reasons, not just the stuff that was turned out, but just for the sort of I don't quite know what the word is, just for the insanity of it all. And so, what was your experience like there?
Well, yeah. So Don Simpson had a reputation of being like a larger than life figure, and he was. This was the era of the sort of like, you know, loud moguls who were, you know, extremely dramatic and a little abusive, and you know, so it was like Joel Silver, Don Simpson, Don Steele, you know, Scott Rudin, a lot of these sort of like larger than life characters. Luckily, I was really never on the front lines of Don's more legendary, let's say, behavior. I was the guy who was like, you know, Charlie, what do you think of this screenplay? Charlie, it was more like very matter of fact and very kind of like respectful. So I only got the best side of him, thank God. But like, did I witness some of the other? Yeah, I mean, I did. I had one of my best friends was Don's personal assistant who got to see much more of the, let's say, more colorful aspects of Don being a big Hollywood producer. But like, honestly, he was one of the most like brilliant story guys I'd ever seen. I understood why he was where he was. Like, he was incredible when it came to story, and so, you know, just learned a lot by reading his notes. Like, he would do 90-page memos on a 100-page script. I'm not kidding.
Wow.
Like, just such a deep dive and going into those scripts. And so anyway, yeah, it was just I learned a lot through doing that. And like, you know, Don was more bombastic. Jerry was you know, more quiet, diligent, focused, took care of like, you know, everything that had to be done behind the scenes. And Don was the guy who was more of a front man, I would guess. And then we lost Don in 1995, I believe, right when we were starting to make The Rock. And so
He died from a drug overdose.
He died of a drug overdose. And what happened was right before that, like a month before that happened, Don and Jerry were kind of like splitting up. They were basically saying like, we're going to go our own way. And so people were being brought into their individual offices as to who was going where. And Jerry was like, you know, Don and I are going to be going our separate ways. And Charlie, I'd like you to come with me. And I was like, I get to go with Jerry. And then unfortunately, yeah, a month later, you know, he passed away. And so basically,
may I just ask?
Jerry. Yeah.
Was part of the breakup precipitated by Don's drug use?
It was the fact that it was becoming difficult when they were trying to put together movies. Don was like, you know, too distracted, and it wound up kind of like just disrupting their ability to really put anything together. And so they said, okay, you know what? I hope you take care of yourself, but I'm going to go this way, you can go that way. And Don was trying. I mean, Don was actually in, you know, all sorts of treatment and stuff like that. Unfortunately, it didn't work, but you know, he was trying. And so literally, like I said, it happened when we were just starting work on The Rock. And so it was a much different company from then on. And Jerry, again, was much more focused. And we started, because there was a big period of time from the time that we left Paramount in like 1989, 90 to the time we started making movies again at Disney was almost 4 or 5 years where we didn't make anything. Like, nobody knew if we were going to like be making movies again. It's hard to think of that now, but that's like half a decade where we were developing movies, nothing was getting off the ground, and then suddenly in 1 year, 3 movies came together very quickly, and they were Dangerous Minds with Michelle Pfeiffer, which was originally called My Posse Don't Do Homework, a movie called Crimson Tide with Denzel Washington and
Gene Hackman.
Yep, Gene Hackman. And then the last one was, original title was Bulletproof Hearts, written by the writer of Midnight Run, George Gallo. Eventually got the title changed to Bad Boys with Martin Lawrence and Will Smith. And this is another like little sidebar things that happened in my career just simply because I was in the right place at the right time. We were making Bad Boys, and Bad Boys was being shot in Miami. Well, I went to University of Miami. I grew up in South Florida, and at the time that we were making the movie, the original screenwriter was David Milch, who created a show called NYPD Blue. David Milch basically said, I have to leave writing the script because ABC just greenlit my series, so I have to like go jump into that right now. Well, we had an incomplete script, but we were shooting. We were shooting down in Coral Gables in Miami, and it was like, Michael Bay's down there, the stars are down there, we need pages, and there was no other writer immediately on the movie for that period of time, like a couple of weeks. And so Lucas Foster, who was head of the company at that time for Don and Jerry, said, Charlie, you write. Because he knew that I wanted to be a writer. I was 21 years old. He had read a couple of my scripts in the office because we're working together. And I'm like, yeah. It's like, well, you know the script. You're helping develop the script here. They need pages. Yeah, can you talk? Work with Michael Bay, and you know what they need, and start cranking out pages. I'm like, oh, okay. So I literally started writing scenes for Bad Boys because they needed pages the following day to shoot it. $400,000, $500,000 a day. And literally I would see the dailies come in, like at the end of the day of things I had written the day earlier. And I was like, this can't be how Hollywood works. Like I'm literally
This
21.
is how Hollywood works. This is it.
Sometimes that is how Hollywood works. And I was seeing jokes and dialogue and literally entire stunts that I wrote being used in the movie. And that gave me an early sense of validation that like, okay, I guess I can do this because this company and this director and these stars are saying my lines and are like shooting my, my moments. I guess I can do this because, and so that gave me a little bit of confidence, like early.
Well, also when somebody like Jerry Bruckheimer, when he's obviously supporting you, he feels that you have the right stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, I guess you don't think of that like I did at the time because I was young and I was just like, I know this can't be how Hollywood works. But at the same time, when you work anywhere long enough, it becomes like this is what you do, like working in an insurance office. It's like it's not all movie premieres and jet setting. It's like you're working on paperwork in an office and trying to like get these things to make sense. So yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because I remember the first time somebody referred to me as a professional, and I sort of like shook it off. I was like, and they were like, well, you're getting paid, you're working at a big company with a lot of big names. I was like, oh yeah, I guess I am a professional, because it's like, you're just doing what you love to do. Right. So you don't really think about it in any other way,
No.
Right.
And yeah. So that was again that and the same thing with Dangerous Minds. It was just that the writer fell out. I think it was Elaine May was writing it, who's no small screenwriter, and a movie that she was working on got greenlit at I think it was Columbia. She basically jumped off of Dangerous Minds when we didn't have a complete script, and it was like, Charlie, go up to the Pasadena where they're shooting at a high school. They need pages. Talk to John Smith, talk to the director, and go up to the trailer and just start doing it. It's like, oh, okay. And I just went up there for a couple, same thing, and just start generating pages that are printed out, run them up to the set, and they're literally shooting them. Like that's what was going on for those movies. Crazy.
That was a big movie for Michelle, who used to be a client, actually. So
yes, and ironically, the friend I drove out from the East Coast to LA with, the guy that worked at Triad, was running her company at the time. Just
wow.
Like sheer coincidence. My former roommate was basically her development person at the time I'm writing those pages on Dangerous Minds. Sometimes again, just
funny how those things work
weird.
out.
Very weird.
And so, what are a couple of sort of big things that you learned at Bruckheimer? What did you take away from Bruckheimer? Because obviously you recently retired. You decided to sort of move on. I mean, after all, what can you do after Top Gun Maverick? Right?
That was a good one to go out on. Yeah.
Yeah. But so, what are some things that you learned over the years?
I mean, look, being being collaborative, making sure that like you get along with people, because like honestly, if people don't like you and want to work with you, then they're not. You know, it's like it's it's a small business, and like people get jobs because they remember that they liked you and they wanted to work with you because it was so much, you know, fun, or it was such a good experience. So you want to basically be not a jerk. You could be, there are people who can be jerks when you reach a certain talent level where your talent is like just so crazy. And not every talented person is a jerk, but some are. But like, you know, when you're trying to just break in, you know, the whole key is you want to create the least friction possible so that people want to work with you. So, you know, you want to be collaborative. When it comes to like screenwriting, concept is king. Like, you know, everybody would submit something. Again, we were, if not the biggest, one of the biggest production companies in Hollywood. Everybody wanted to send a script to us. We couldn't accept everything. There would literally be no way to get through all the material. So there had to be some discernment. You had to like decide what were we going to accept. And it would always come down to, you know, what's the big idea? What's the basic idea? What's the concept? What's the premise? And so, like, I'm a huge believer that, like, if you're trying to break in, like, a good writer can make anything work. If you're a great writer, you can make anything work. But nobody's going to read your writing until they, like, solicit your material. And the only way that's going to happen is by having, like, an idea that's cool enough, interesting enough, dynamic enough, novel enough, that somebody's going to want to read that, whatever that is. And so very early on, I learned that, you know, if you want people to pay attention to you and you're a screenwriter, make sure you're coming up with really cool ideas. And like, you know, if you just nurture like one idea for like 2 years, 3 years and you're writing it, that's not a good formula. You really have to constantly be generating new concepts, new ideas, even though Hollywood is so now IP driven, right? Where everything is kind of a sequel or a reboot or a remake. That's great. But you still have to break in as a writer. You still have to, like, you know, you have to come to people's attention. And like, you can't write Superman. You can't write a Marvel movie. You can't write a sequel to something. So you're going to have to write an original piece of material that people are going to want to read. Well, how do you get a stranger to want to read your material? You've got no track record. You're unproduced. You don't even have representation. It's like, oh, that's a cool idea. Whatever that is, it's as simple as that. I can't tell you the amount of times that I would be in my office reading with the door open, and Jerry would be walking to the kitchen, and Jerry would see me behind my desk reading a script, like, hey, what are you reading? Well, if I can't tell him in like, you know, 15 seconds, 20 seconds, here's what the basic idea is, and get his attention to go, yeah, that sounds great. Or, oh, great, okay. You know, like you could tell immediately, yeah. Did I get his attention? Is there a switch flipped in his head that was a cool idea? And if it was, he would ask about it again. It was simple.
I've had people literally walk away on me, you know, so like you're reading a script, somebody asks you what's it about, and the concept isn't particularly strong, and you're trying to find a way to present it as succinctly and as cool as possible, and you do your best, and like literally midway through that, people just walk away. Yeah. And I'm thinking, this is just not going to bode well for the script. And it's true. And you know, I always hate to bring up the brave souls in the inside pitch who share their log lines, but you know, you read a lot of them and you're just like, yeah, like this just isn't really a movie. This isn't anything that anybody's ever going to buy. Like, you want to make it yourself, yeah, fine, but you know, like this, the odds of this interesting a rep are slim to none. And, you know, very, very rarely do I go into that on the group page, because I just sort of feel like it's not like it's, you know, like that's not what I want to do, right? I just want to sort of motivate people to be creative and write what they want to write. If this, like, okay, right, fine. If this is what you want to write, write it. But the truth is, like, somebody did just put up what I thought was kind of a quasi interesting pitch, but I kind of said, look, you know, it's like the odds of you enticing a producer or a rep with this are slim.
Right. Right.
And so, you know, and that's often the case.
No, and the truth of the matter is, again, like, because you're leading with this, I wish, and you know, I when I talk to clients and I try to, you know, explain that this is your kind of like your calling card, or the, you know, if you're at a bar and people are like, what's going to make them interested in you? It's like that idea is the only thing you have at that point. It's not the execution of the idea because they haven't read your script yet. They have to ask for your script, and they're only going to ask for it if the thing that you're telling them in like a couple of lines is so compelling and dynamic and cool and interesting that they want to read that. Like their brain is going like, all right, I want to see how that turns out. And that's how you have to get them. And so even from the time, here's a funny story. The first thing, I have little nibbles and little bits of business, but the first script that I wrote that, you know, really got sold to a big company and actually got me my first agent. I had a writers group in North Hollywood, me and my friends. You know, this is 1991, and we're all sitting around and having pizza and, you know, talking about the ideas that we're thinking about writing or the ideas we are writing. There's like 6 or 7 of us. And, you know, my friend and I are there, and we have posters on the wall of our apartment. One of them was big. One of them was Lethal Weapon, because we were fans of both of those movies. And so, as a joke, I pitched in the meeting, Lethal Weapon meets Big. I was like, what is that idea? I'm like, Lethal Weapon meets Big in reverse. So the 2 cops from Lethal Weapon, like cops like that, get zapped by a machine and they get turned into kids, but with their adult minds. So now it's, you know, Murtaugh and Riggs, these kind of bad boy cops in 10-year-old bodies having to like do an investigation, drive cars, shoot at the bad guys, talk dirty, like all that kind of stuff. And it got a laugh out of the group. And I'm like, oh, that was kind of a funny joke. And as we broke up at the end of the night, one of my best friends comes over and he's like, that's not a bad idea. I'm like, come on, it's a silly idea. He's like, it's a high concept idea. Let's think about that for a couple of minutes. I'm like, okay. I mean, if you want to do that, if you want to talk about that, and we talked about it, and we're like, yeah, you know, this might be kind of fun. And it was a time in the early 90s and a lot of big high concept spec scripts were selling.
That shit sold back then.
It did, right?
It did.
And so we worked on that script for, you know, whatever it was, 6 months, 8 months. And then when we finally got a draft that we thought was decent enough, we gave it to a woman who worked at Schuler Donner on the Warner Brothers lot, who was a friend of Shane's. We met her through Shane. I'll name check her, Sue Smith. Thank you, Sue. And she read it and she responded to that script. And she said, I think I'm going to send this to somebody I know at United Talent. And that's how that script got set up. That's how I got the agent. But again, it came out of an idea that I would have thrown away. I wouldn't have followed up on that. But it was so ridiculously high concept that it actually, it was a hook. And that helped.
It moved the needle for you, right?
It moved the
needle. Yeah. Because I always think that's sort of the game is look, you're not going to sell every single script you write. Hopefully it can move the needle. It should always move the needle intrinsically, meaning like, you know, you've learned as a writer and what you may not do in your next script, but also professionally.
Yes.
You know, does it enable you to advance to the next square, so to speak, in some way? And again, in this business, you can advance, you know, 3 steps and then find yourself back another 7 steps. And eventually, I mean, that's the way the business works.
It's not linear. No,
it's not. But still, yes, so, you know, an incredibly silly idea, but like you see the movie, right? Like, you know, you can totally see the movie.
Or again, at least intrigues you enough to want to read that script to say, I'm curious how that's going to turn out. And then if you execute it halfway decently, then 2 possibilities, right? One is, God willing, they auction it or they sell it, which is harder. But the other more important thing is make sure it's a great writing sample. So if they read it and they're like, okay, you know what, at the end of the day, the concept is not what I thought it was, but they're good with dialogue, they're good with character, it reads really well. I wonder what else they're working on. Or we have a project, we have a book, we have an article, something. Maybe take a look at this and see if you have any ideas. So it has to work on both levels. And as you just pointed out, most of the time it's not going to be a sale, but it has to at least be a great sample.
but people won't even get to the sample if they can't get through the concept. So
Right.
so let's just stick with this for a
Yep.
little bit
Yep.
more,
Yep. Yep.
because look, not everybody wants to write Lethal Weapon meets Big, right? And so we have to accept that. But still, there are ways to find interesting concepts within something that maybe is not necessarily high concept. So just as an example, I saw a movie yesterday called Tony, which is a biopic of Anthony Bourdain. And as I was telling you before, I don't know who Anthony Bourdain is. I mean, obviously I knew of his celebrity, but I'm not a foodie. I never saw any
Yeah.
of his shows. I never read any of his books. I'm not a fan. But I went to see the movie, and the movie is basically just a slice of his life, specifically dramatizing the the events that lead to him finding his bliss,
Right.
which eventually leads to the creation of Anthony Bourdain. And so there's your pitch,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's a story of the events that lead to Anthony Bourdain finding his culinary bliss, finding his
Yeah.
inspiration to then become who he became.
Right.
That is a lot more interesting than just saying, "Oh yeah, it's the life story of Anthony Bourdain."
Yeah, and by the way, what you're describing, I feel like, is the kind of thing that the Blacklist was famous for finding, right? The Blacklist found a lot of quirky biopics. That seemed to be like a favorite subgenre of things that made it onto the Blacklist, and
Right?
many of them got made. You
Yeah.
know?
They're following the lead of Karaszewski and Alexander. In fact, I was
Yep.
just having lunch with a friend over on South Beverly, and they walked by, and so we were chatting with them, and these guys are sort of the kings of those quirky biopics, and
Yep.
often just sort of being able to find a hook, right? So like, for
Yep.
example, Ed Wood, they choose to write the Ed Wood biopic because Ed Wood was the worst filmmaker of all time, right? It's
Right.
not like he was just a filmmaker. Like if you went in and said, "Yeah, so I have a story about a guy named Ed Wood. He was a filmmaker." That's not
Yeah.
a good pitch. But to be able to say the worst filmmaker of all time,
Right. Right.
right, right,
Right. And they found a way to make his story inspiring, which is the guy doesn't have talent, but by
right,
God, he's got enthusiasm and he's got gumption and he's got, he's going to find a way, despite the fact that he doesn't have talent, to make
right,
this work. And he does. And
right,
it's a great film. I mean, it's a really great film.
right. One of my favorites about the movie business. Somebody
Yeah.
is chiming in and saying
Yeah.
that the Anthony Bourdain example seems like high concept of character rather than plot. And I don't always know if that's true because just because you have a famous person doesn't necessarily make the biopic sound interesting. For example, there have been lots of biopics on Abraham Lincoln, but only one about his rather, unscrupulous attempt
Right.
to abolish slavery.
Right. Right.
So that's really the hook.
Yeah.
It's not the person in of itself. I mean, maybe sometimes, I guess, like if it's Michael Jackson, okay, but Anthony Bourdain was not Michael Jackson.
No, and
I
by the
mean,
way, there are biopics that are sweeping that cover their entire life. There are biopics that are like Steve Jobs, just cover 3 hours or 45
right.
minutes in
Yeah, yeah,
somebody's
yeah.
life. So part of your job when you're doing an adaptation like that is to figure out, like, how do I tell this story in like a compelling way, and what do I focus on, right?
Right,
Because you can't do justice to the entire life of anybody. You're going to have to
right,
focus on what was a pivot point, or what is the most important thing that happened, and then tell the story about that. Which, by the way, you could describe that as almost any good movie. Any good movie is, you're telling one of the most important things to happen to the main character of that movie. That's why you're telling that story. It's not any day. Or it's not any period of time. It's a period of time in that person's life that is incredibly important because it changed who they were, how they lived their lives, or found
right.
love, or something that
And
was
that
like,
becomes the hook.
yeah, that is the hook. Yes,
That is the hook.
absolutely.
And maybe it's even a story behind the story, right? So, like, everybody knows about let's say, Anthony Bourdain's success as a TV, whatever he did. And, but maybe people don't know, how he got there. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, so often sort of the story behind the story can be a hook, but it is about thinking about a hook. Some woman on the inside pitch the other day, uh, sorry, my phone's ringing, but I can't
No,
see
no
it.
problem.
Can you hear it ringing, by the way?
Just very little, very little.
Okay, sorry about that, folks. It'll stop eventually, but I can't. Oh, it's ringing. Sorry. So, but yeah, like somebody the other day pitched something on the page, just about like it was pretty much just about like the 18 years in a woman's life. And
Right.
yeah, and it was like, yeah, like can you find like a week, or a day or a moment in her life
Oh,
that can,
I remember the picture talking about. I think it
yeah,
was about a
yeah,
woman
yeah,
whose husband died or something, and basically she had
yes,
to figure out how to. And it was like we've talked about this. I think even in the comments, which is there are ideas that I would call half an idea. Half an idea is something happens that's common, but the uncommon way that they have to deal with it is the movie. For example, I use this a lot. A guy's kid is kidnapped, and he's got to get the kid back. That's a half an idea. That's that. What is it about the kidnapping that makes it a movie? Well, if it's Raising Arizona, you're rooting for the kidnappers. If it's Ransom, it's the premise of they took my kid, but rather than give the money for ransom, I'm going to give the money to smoke out the kidnappers. Okay, that's high concept.
If it's taken,
yeah,
if it's taken, the mild mannered dad turns out to be, a
James
black
Bond.
assassin,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah, and 9 to 5. It's like basically 3 harried office workers got sick of their boss and they kidnapped their boss and they reformed their office and become superstars. Those are all kidnapping movies. By the way,
Oh, God, the one that I love with Bette Midler and Danny DeVito,
Ruthless People,
Ruthless People, which
right?
is basically the Ransom of Red Chief, right?
Yeah, and Ransom the
Uh,
Red Chief. The kidnappers kidnap somebody, and the husband doesn't want them back. And
right,
now, what do you do? Those
right.
are all variations on. So that
They're
I would say,
twists.
like again, that's it.
They're all
That's it.
twists, right? Like
We,
a lot of writers in the inside pitch would just have somebody be kidnapped.
correct.
Right.
And this is a great example right here. This is how do you come up with cool ideas? Well, if you want to do a kidnapping, what is the most interesting twist on a kidnapping story that you can come up with? Because that will be what makes me, an executive sitting on the other side of the desk, want to read it. Like, okay, I've never heard of that before. There's I think it's a book called The Chain or something like that, where it's like a woman's son is kidnapped and it's by some sort of shadowy group that basically has kind of a running con where it's like, we're going to kidnap your kid, and in order to get your kid released, you're going to have to kidnap somebody else's kid that we're going to ransom. And this has been going on for years. So like, what do I do? I mean, what do I do if I'm in that situation? Well, that's a high concept, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so
Or Kurosawa's High and Low, right? Which was
yes,
just remade, which is dealing with having to pay the ransom for the wrong kid
for the
who was
wrong
kidnapped.
kid.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, that is one technique. One technique would basically be take it's something old, something new is what I would call it. Take something old in terms of a premise, but come up with a new twist on it that is so cool or so interesting that are provocative that I am like, I'm surprised nobody ever came up with that before. That's kind of interesting. I want to read that script now. You may blow it, and maybe you don't execute it well, but just to get the read, just to get the interest is what you want to do as a writer. And that's the trick is over time, not just working at Bruckheimer, but also because I've written myself and I've sold a bunch of things. How do you come up with ideas that are different, interesting enough that I know somebody's going to want to at least ask to read that idea? The biggest thing I ever sold was like, I was at Disneyland with my kids and I saw like a Mylar balloon of Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, and Snow White on the same balloon. And then it was the summer that Charlie's Angels was in theaters. and my brain just connected them. And like, okay, what about a movie where the fairy tale princesses, they're all married to the Prince Charmings, right? Maybe they're brothers, and they all married Prince Charming, so they all live together. They're all sisters-in-law, and an evil queen comes, and the husbands go out to try to defeat the evil queen, and they're abducted, they're kidnapped, and now the wives had to go rescue the husbands. So Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, and Snow White have to leave the castle, jump on horses, and do the thing they've never done. That's my concept. Right. And I sold that to MGM for a nice chunk of change, and it was like, that was the first real big. And it was like IP, because it's like, you know, it's public domain. Those characters are public domain. It was coming up with a big twist on sort of the fairy tale idea. And so you can train your brain to start thinking that way and go, okay, like what everybody wants to do IP, right? Means intellectual property, something that people have heard of. Well, you can't do Batman and you can't do the Marvel heroes. But what can you do? The Bible is public domain. Shakespeare stories are public domain. The classic monsters, you know, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Frankenstein, Dracula are public domain. Santa Claus is public domain. The Greek myths are public domain. There's a lot of them. So what, as you as a writer, what can I come up with to put a twist on those ideas and come up with something you have never seen before that takes some of those concepts and twists them and makes them interesting? One of the first things I also sold was a treatment for Frankenstein. And it was like after Francis Coppola made Dracula, and it was like I was running into a friend at the Beverly Center, and he's like, "What are you working on?" I'm like, "I have this idea to do Frankenstein because Dracula's out." He's like, "Oh, you know what? We just got a new production company over at Sony. If you have anything, send it to me." I went home that afternoon. I wrote a 15-page treatment. I got my clip notes of Frankenstein. I came up with a really interesting version of Frankenstein that was true to the book but had some twists, and I sold it. Like it never happened as easily as that again, but it worked. And it was like, again, example of public IP. So you can do that too. That's another way that you can kind of come up with a high concept idea.
Yeah, you know, I think when people talk about IP, I think that we sort of have to be clear on this, because when a lot of people think, oh, well, you know, I wrote a novel and so I'm going to adapt that and it's IP. And technically it is IP. I mean, technically it is IP, but it's not IP, but it's not IP the way Hollywood sort of defines IP. So why don't you make that clear?
IP, as Hollywood defines it, is something that has a built-in public awareness and or audience, meaning that it's something that everybody has heard of and everybody loves. Superman, Mickey Mouse, James Bond, things that are characters that we know, Star Wars, you know, that's IP because it's something that everybody's heard of and everybody loves it. So your job is, well, I can't write those things because they're controlled by big studios. So what is IP I can write? Oliver Twist is in public domain. Can you come up with a twist on Oliver Twist? Can you come up with a modern version? Maybe it's set in, you know, LA in the late 60s is something, and maybe it's with, you know, an African-American Oliver Twist. There are ways that you can figure out how to do Oliver Twist.
Maybe it's set in Skid Row, downtown LA, right now.
There's a million ways that you can find a way to update that property and make it interesting. Take a character and recontextualize them. You know, there were a bunch of variations. Sherlock Holmes was in public domain, right? And people were like, well, for a while there, somebody wrote Sherlock Holmes from the point of view of Watson. And, you know, and that was one way to do the story. Moriarty is the villain. Well, can you do like a version of Sherlock Holmes from the point of view of the villain, like Wicked? And maybe he was misunderstood. Maybe that would be an interesting way to do that character. You know, find a way to make the villain the hero. That is what Wicked is. You know, I mean, find another angle on a classic story that you haven't seen before. Peter Pan from Tinkerbell's point of view. They're in public domain. Go write that. You know, it's like there are a million versions of that like it's intriguing. Okay, I haven't heard of that before. That's kind of cool. And so the more you can train your brain to think like that, which is like, what is high concept or IP adjacent that I can come up with? But like,
and we've seen a lot of that, right? Like Dracula. There was Renfield.
Yes.
There was the movie about the ship.
The Last Voyage of the Demeter. A friend of mine wrote that. Yeah.
Correct.
Hmm.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I read a script called Mina Harker.
Yep.
So it
Yep.
comes from her point of view. Oh, my God, it's like
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, the stuff.
I mean, they made a TV show about Alfred, Batman's butler. There
Right.
literally is a TV show called Pennyworth, and it's like, okay, you can do that. And by the way, Andor, which is the Disney show about one of the characters in one of the Disney one of the sequels to the Star Wars movie, is one of the best Star Wars stories ever. Now, granted, Tony Gilroy wrote it and ran the show, and he's one of Hollywood's greatest screenwriters.
Well,
But the point is,
whatever.
But he figured out a way, which is like, how is Disney going to give me hundreds of millions of dollars to tell this epic story? And he found it in a supporting character from Rogue One, which is a prequel to Star Wars. And
Right.
it's like, holy cow, this is an amazing, amazing piece of work.
Because also, the Rogue One story sort of revolved around that very, very interesting piece of story in the Star Wars movie, right? And then they just created this entire backstory. That's actually, I think, probably my most favorite Star Wars movie, out of all those.
I remember when I read in the trades the little description of that was going to be one of the first Star Wars movies, spin-off movies they were going to do, and I heard that was what the premise was. I'm like, oh my God, that's brilliant! Like that, the spies that got the plans to help destroy the Death Star, like the backstory of how that's brilliant. You came up with that. So your job as a writer, I think, is to try to figure out like what is the take, what is the angle, what is the way into a story that we have not seen before about a character, a situation, like a piece of IP. And if you can do that, I'll want to read your script. So come up with that,
Right. The key, of course, is to make sure that it is in public domain. For instance, somebody just chimed in and said, I've heard Peter Pan is off limits. I don't know if that's true or not, maybe because of Disney, but maybe not. So again, you'd have to do a little bit of research. Somebody says that they played one of Fagan's kids in a local children's theater production.
I did too.
By the way, I'm going to be in London in October for the Ignite the Spark retreat, and I already have my tickets to see Oliver.
Awesome.
I believe it's at the Gielgud Theater, so I am there. I'm very, very excited to see that. So I think like great stuff here. Yeah, really sort of mining that IP stuff and perhaps finding a modern interpretation of it, perhaps or not. Maybe keeping it period is really cool and interesting.
Well, look at the movie. Look at the movie Clueless, right? With
exactly correct.
All right, what is Clueless? Clueless is Emma.
It's Emma
in high school, in modern high school.
Right.
That's
Or
Amy Heckerling.
10 Things I Hate About You.
Exactly.
Right. Which is Taming of the Shrew, right? And just finding stuff like that and updating it in a way, and because then you can say it's based on.
Right. And by the way, Emma is a comedy of manners, but she found a way to make it a modern comedy. And like, sometimes it's a genre switch. You could do that too for a high concept. I always said like Home Alone could be done as a thriller. Easily. It's like, that's a very funny premise in Home Alone, but think of how terrifying that could be. If, like, a
movie that I produced called The Collector. A lot of people refer to it as just a sadistic Home Alone.
But that's one way.
Thing. It was a house booby trapped.
Yeah.
Of course, in my movie, people lost their heads. Maybe a little bit different than what Kevin McAllister is doing, but yeah, exactly right. Just kind of switching these things up a little bit and putting them on a taffy puller, as I like to say. Somebody wrote here, Stephen Hoover wrote, some properties are public domain, but the specific interpretations aren't. So like here he's referring to The Wizard of Oz. In in Frank Baum's novel, the shoes are silver. They're
silver slippers.
But
yes.
silver didn't work good in Technicolor. No. So they made them ruby slippers. So ruby slippers belong to MGM.
Correct.
Right. So there are a lot of intricacies, again, that you have to sort of play around with. But that's your job. And now it's not all that hard. You know?
No, and you know that right up front, which is if you're going to go to any kind of like public domain IP, you have to go back to the source material. You can't go to anything that's been interpreted in any sort of like modern works, because yes, those are covered by copyright and trademark. So yeah.
Yeah, because often we're inspired by things that were inspired by the original work, right?
Yeah.
So like somebody wants to do a modern version of Frankenstein, but they never read the book. They were just inspired by the universal Frankenstein.
Correct.
And so now they go and they play around with that. That's where you get into trouble.
Yes. And by the way,
unless if it's a spoof, by the way, remember, if it's a spoof, although it's still, it can still be a little bit tricky, but if it's a spoof, that's sort of
falls under fair use.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Satire and spoof. So, you can always look into that as well. So there's a lot of that. I think that's great. By the way, if anybody has questions, I'm only looking at the questions that are coming to me through the YouTube stream. So if you're putting them on the Inside Pitch Facebook page, I'm not seeing them because I'm not coordinated enough to go back and forth. I might end up like disconnecting us here. Usually my co-pilot, Ramesh, is much more adroit at being able to juggle all that stuff.
No, I hope he's showing me.
Yeah. So, all right. So you definitely learned that concept is
king. Also, another thing that writers have to learn, which is, I see this a lot online, which is I just finished my first screenplay. Now how do I get it made into a movie? It's like, well, if it's your first screenplay, 99.9% of the time it's not ready for market and it's not, going to be turned into a screenplay. Could it? Yes, you could also win the lottery tomorrow. It's entirely possible. But the reality is, writing is rewriting. It's a cliche, which is, every movie that we developed with Jerry took years, many drafts. It never comes out right the first time.
You think it does. Or, it's like you read it and you're like, this is great. Nobody's going to want to change a word. And then 20 drafts later, then you realize, that first draft wasn't great.
Yeah. And look, Back to the Future is to me like a masterclass in screenwriting. The final draft, the first draft doesn't resemble that final draft at all. It went through like years and years and years of all kinds of changes. But when you look at the final version of the movie, you're like, oh my God, this is like clockwork. All the setups and payoffs, and it's just so intricate. You never, ever, ever, ever could have come up with all of that in your very first draft. It's impossible. So I think a lot of writers have this idea that it has to be perfect out of the gate with their first draft. It's never perfect. Just get it written, and then you can start rewriting it and playing with it and getting feedback.
Don't be in a rush, right? Don't be in a rush to end your career before it even gets started. That's the problem.
Yeah, I mean, look, you want to get feedback on your material, but you don't want that to go to. I finished my first script. Now I want to get it to Steven Spielberg. It's like, not yet. You don't want to get it to Steven Spielberg yet. You need some feedback. You need to like marinate with it a little bit. You need to work with it. You need to. It's not ready just because you finish your first draft. And I say this all the time. In all of my years in Hollywood, it's going on 37 years. I met one person who sold their very first script that they ever wrote, which they wrote for a class in college, and it got produced. It's one person did that one time. I'm not saying it can't happen, but I'm saying the odds are extraordinarily remote. The very first thing you wrote is going to get made, is going to get sold. It's more than likely that it's going to be a couple of years, more than a couple of years, and more than a couple of screenplays.
Was that also, by the way, maybe during a time when stuff was really selling? Yeah. Yeah, because I had a student who also sold his first script. I want to say it was for $1.7 million.
That's pretty good.
That was at a time. That movie was never made, but he did end up in he does to this day have a massive career as one of TV's most successful showrunners.
No,
But
that's fantastic.
yeah, so but that's a little bit like winning the Powerball.
Yeah, again,
You know,
it can happen, but just don't
absolutely
expect
it
it
can
to
happen.
happen. And
Yeah,
again, like I just you use my example because I'm somebody who didn't come in with any connections and had to figure out the connections. And everybody that I know that's a professional screenwriter, with the exception of that one person, it took years. It took years. It took scripts. It took meeting many people. It took a number of different jobs and opportunities before they finally broke through. And that's why it's a long game. It's not really a lottery. So if you're going to break through, it's more than likely you're going to break through after you've like built up your skills and built up your connections, and then those two things will align. You'll have a script that's the best thing you've ever written. It's the best idea you've ever come up with, and you're going to finally get into the hands of somebody who's going to read it and go, "This is so good. I want to be part of the chain of title of getting this somewhere. I want to like give it to an agent, give it to a producer, give it to my friend who's an actor, because it's that good."
yeah,
And that's what you want. That's
yeah,
the way it's going to happen.
yeah. All right, so let's go through some of these questions. Chris has a question here. What are biggest mistakes new screenwriters make? You have one or two?
Yeah, well, we're
One
talking
is
about
too
them right
soon,
now.
we just said. Yeah. Okay.
Too soon is one of them. Not getting feedback. Not reading enough screenplays to see what a normal screenplay looks like, feels like, the formatting, the scene length, how long it should be, just very basic rookie things. I see a lot of people say, I want to write a screenplay, or I'm coming up with ideas, but then it's like, how many scripts have you read? How many movies have you broken down? Like, have you gone back to watch your favorite films and like deconstructed them and like freeze them and kind of said, okay, that opening scene was like a minute and a half long and there were 42 scenes, and like that level of kind of like really studying and deconstructing, because that's how you learn. You learn by like examining and studying, and you learn by doing. As we just pointed out, writing not great ideas, like, workshop maybe some of your ideas, and, don't go with the first idea you came up with. Like, maybe talk to some of your friends or family and say, I'm thinking of writing this idea. And you can tell, like, are they interested in that idea, or are they kind of shining you on going, yeah, it's okay. It's like, be a little bit more discerning about what you're going to spend months working on. Because again, if you spend 3, 4, 5, 6 months writing something that's kind of a mediocre, half-ass, or generic idea, you're dead. That's like
This is also, I think, with all due respect to the passion that a lot of writers have. For example, somebody might say, oh, I have this wonderful story about my grandmother.
Yeah.
And you hear the story and it's like, okay, I understand why it's wonderful for you because it's your grandmother. But
Right.
honestly, it's not all that wonderful for me. I don't think it's going to be all that wonderful for anybody else. But this person is compelled to have to tell that story. And then they end up writing
Right.
a fairly unremarkable screenplay with a concept that doesn't interest anybody. And then the execution, even if it's beautifully written, it's still a pretty dull, dramatic story.
Yeah.
And so this is the thing. It's that, it's like you're asking somebody to invest 20, 30 million dollars into something. This is not an art form like painting.
Correct.
This is an art form for the masses. And so,
Yeah.
so you have to think that way a little bit,
Right. Well, and I was going to say another thing, another big mistake that they make is, when I'm working with a client or when I'm working with a young writer, and they've written something, I ask, like, what are the comps? What are the other movies like this that you can point to? Because, like, you have to be able to do that when you're talking to producers, or producers have to be able to see that. As we just discussed, if when Hollywood is looking for fresh ideas, they don't mean David Lynch or Harmony Korine or Lars von Trier. That's not what they mean by fresh ideas.
Correct.
Those are too fresh. You want somebody who comes in with a fresh voice, telling a story that's broadly similar to what you've seen before, but in a new and interesting way. So that's another mistake that maybe like you just mentioned, I'll write a family story that is sweet and important to the family. And by the way, good for you, as long as you understand the odds of you selling that are probably very remote. Maybe it's a great writing sample, but
Yes.
it probably won't sell.
Right. I mean, sometimes you have to write what you have to write, but
Yeah.
you shouldn't expect that the industry is going to embrace it.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're just writing it because it's what you want to write.
Yes.
So yes, so and I can respect that, but be realistic. All right, somebody's asking, what is a sticky concept?
A sticky concept is basically something that sticks in your head and makes somebody, like I just said with the story with Jerry, walking past my office. If I can, what are you reading? It's a guy who falls in love with a mermaid. That's funny. I was like, okay, next time I talk to Jerry, he's like, whatever happened to the script? The guy who fell in love with a mermaid. He remembers the idea. It's an idea that is so unique or novel or sexy or dynamic or exciting or different that it kind of like connects to somebody who heard it and they're like, I want to hear more about that idea. I want to see how that story unfolds. It's got some grippiness that you remember the idea. And a lot of times, like Chris, I'm a guy who has a lot of ideas. And like, I don't write them all down. You should definitely write down your ideas because they fly out of your head. But the truth of the matter is, if it's a really good, interesting idea, it'll stick in your head, and eventually you'll come back to it. But I think sticky just means something that grabs people's attention. And if you're like watching Netflix and you're scrolling through all of the little log lines, you want to watch the thing that's interesting. That's why you're gonna like tune into that program. That's a sticky concept.
I have a friend who likes to use the word chewy, that it's a chewy concept in that you can really sort of think about it and kind of like pull on it and tear it apart and sort of all of that because it's got substance.
Yeah, it makes your imagination fire, and it
Yes.
makes you go, you know what? I can already come up with things in my head that are interesting. Okay, now I want to see the movie. How does the movie play out?
Yeah. Right, exactly. All right, somebody is asking, what topics are taboo?
Well, nowadays I would say anything that's too overly political, because we live in an era when we have, an administration that is going after studios and journalists and things like that. And so maybe on an indie level, you'd see that, I mean, maybe indie filmmakers are like, yeah, it's my time.
Like The Apprentice,
Yeah, exactly. All the President's Men, things like that are not being made in Hollywood at this particular moment in time. That could change in the next year or two very quickly as we go through the next couple of election cycles. And maybe there's going to be a period like there was after Watergate and like there was after Vietnam, where there's going to be a bunch of films that are made about this particular period of time where people are going, how the hell was that okay? How did we live through that period? How was that real? And it's like, bold filmmakers will probably decide that there are certain things that, subject matter that right now are very taboo. I'll give you an example. There's an article that I read. I wish I can remember who wrote it, but it was about the 48 or 72 hours after the Access Hollywood tape was revealed, before the election of 2016. It was hilarious because it was like, you forget this period where the tape came out. It was right before the debate with Hillary Clinton. It was literally like a couple of weeks before the 2016 election, when the Republican Party was ready to walk away entirely from Donald Trump. They were emergency trying to figure out, who else they could put up for that. They were literally ready to cut bait with that until his debate performance, and it seemed like voters were willing to stick with him. But it was an amazing article, and I'm like, that could be a little black comedy for HBO. That period of time, like that the high stakes. It's kind of like black comic. It's got literally all these people trying to figure out, how do we navigate this incredible crisis before one of these big elections. And it's like, you're looking for things like that. But right now, it would be hard to make that right now. But maybe in years to come. Child molestation, you probably don't want to make movies about that. You probably don't want to make, violence is apparently always okay. I mean, the Terrifier movie show, you can, the Ice Cream Man.
I saw Ice Cream Man. they cut the principal's head off and then they scoop his brains out into a cone.
Yeah, literally,
There you go.
Violence you could do. Sex is still a little bit weird and taboo. I mean, could you make a movie like Call Me by Your Name now? Good question. I don't know. Certain movies like that probably are hard. But I think you, on an instinctual level, gut level, you probably know what taboo is. It's like what the Supreme Court justice said about pornography. I know it when I see it.
Yeah.
You probably know what taboo is.
And I still think that if it's done in a particular way, then maybe, I mean, look, like, back in the 70s, incest was probably fairly taboo, but they managed to get away with it in Chinatown.
Flowers in the attic.
Flowers in the attic.
Yeah.
But that's based on a book, right? That's
yeah. So is Lolita. Yeah. Stanley Kubrick made Lolita. Yes. Would somebody make Lolita now?
Well, they remade it in the 90s, right?
That's true. Would they make it now? In the Epstein era.
Well, look, we've got Rob Pattinson is coming out playing Chris Hansen,
right,
in a movie about To Catch a Predator.
Right.
So, so again, you kind of find that particular angle. There was a very good script. I think it was on the blacklist. I have to be careful. I think it's called Mother's Boy or something like that. It's all about incest.
Oh, Jesus.
It's all about incest. And it's really good and, very surprising. Yeah. And so I think it's just sort of the way stories are told.
Right. Right.
All right. Thank you. All right. Let's see. Queries, contests, conferences, living in LA.
Right.
Hey, Annie.
Well, you can still hear me okay, Chris?
Oh, loud and clear.
Okay. Look, queries is one of the things you can try, I would say, at Bruckheimer, because we got so many submissions. I can take this off. No. We have so many submissions that queries were difficult for us just because we got submitted so much material. Is that to say that, if you weren't represented by an agent or a manager, but I met you at a party or at a premiere or through a friend or something like that, and if you pitched me, a concept that I was interested in, would I solicit it? Sure. But if it's like coming over the transom, and it's something that's just like throwing a dart at a production company, those are hard. I'm not saying you shouldn't try, but like,
did anybody ever look at them?
Really rarely. And usually at our company, again, it had to be, look, somebody who was a friend of Jerry's driver might get their script read because Jerry's driver asked Jerry one day, can you look at the script? But it was rare. Because again, we were seeing too much material. It was just too hard to focus on things like that. So
right.
That was hard. Contests, again, not really at Bruckheimer. I mean, if something won like, Nichols, if something like won that, yes.
Not that a Nichols script was ever particularly Jerry Bruckheimer.
No. But the writers were good writers that you would want to meet with, and then you would want to hear what they're working on, or maybe hire them to work on your projects. By the way, not everybody who worked on Bruckheimer's projects were Aaron Sorkin or Tony Gilroy or Craig Mazin. Like, yes, we did work with those people, but at any given time, we were working on 2-3 dozen projects. They're not all that level, so there were a lot of up and coming writers, and we had to find them somehow. So those were either through, agents or managers or references to people that we knew or things like that.
However, though, Charlie, it's kind of fair to say that most places today don't come close to having the kind of development slate. Let's face it, a lot of places back then didn't come close to having the development slate that Bruckheimer had. And even now, today, development is almost kind of a thing of the past. It's like they're not developing scripts as much as they used to because it's too expensive.
No, and by the way, that makes it more challenging if you're trying to break in, because there used to be a system that would basically like work on and develop those screenplays over time. Now writers are kind of expected to do that work themselves and get the script in much better shape
Correct.
before you share it with anybody. In the old days, again, I could sell a treatment, I could sell a one-liner, I could do that in the early 90s. It's a lot harder to do that now, so you have to like really work on your craft. And which again is not to say that if I met you at a party somewhere and you pitched me an idea and it was a dynamite idea, I might want to like hear the pitch. I mean, you know, that might in fact happen. But yeah, you'd have to be at a party or at a premiere or through somebody that knew me or something. And again, that's how I did it too. I met people and they introduced me to people, and you know, there was no social media in the late 80s, early 90s. I literally had to find Fred Decker's agent in some arcane Byzantine way. Nowadays, everything is online. You know, literally almost every big screenwriter or personality has a social media account. I have writer friends who meet people through Facebook. Like that happens. It's hard, but it happens. And if you're not a jerk, sometimes you can pull that off.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. How about conferences and living in LA?
Look, if you can live in LA, it helps your chances. Because again, I moved to LA out of school as soon as I could back in the late 80s, because that's where the agencies are, that's where the studios are, that's where writers can meet each other in coffee shops and bars. And I live in like the Hollywood Hills area under the Hollywood sign. And there's a coffee shop like right around the corner from where I live. And you'll see TV actors there, writers. I mean, Chris Nolan lives nearby. Like it's like if you're in the area, you might run into those people in those places. And like if you're nice and you see them and you talk to them and like whatever, you shouldn't immediately try to give them their script on your phone. But the point is, if you start meeting people and you start talking to them and they'll ask you what you're working on, and that's how you make those connections. You can't out of the blue say, hey, would you spend a day of your life reading my screenplay and then talking to me and giving me notes? Because just to let anybody out there know, to read a script, or at least the way I learned to read a script at Bruckheimer, right? I'm really reading the script. I'm not like burning through it the way like maybe some reader might, because he wants to get through it and just like quickly write it up. Like I'm really reading it. I'm really making notes. I'm like, it's taking me, I'm reading it in slow motion in a way. And sometimes I'll read it twice. And then I'm going to sit down with you and I'll go over the notes. That's a full workday of like, 8 to 10 hours that I'm going to be doing that. So again, as much as I would like to help people pro bono, and it's not like I won't, but I have friends who give me a screenplay and it takes me months sometimes to read it, because I've got clients, I've got my own scripts I'm working on, I'm producing films, I'm like, there are things that I'm doing. So just be cognizant of that. Yes, living in LA, if you could do it, you should try. It's expensive. It's expensive, and it's
it's also a little bit of a young person's game.
For sure.
So if you're somebody who's very well established in your life, let's say you're in your 40s or your 50s, and coming out to LA is probably impractical. But if you're somebody who's graduating from college and you could live here as well as maybe live anywhere else, it
Right.
might be something that you want to give a whirl to. But again, the other thing too is that, remember, writing is fairly intrinsic, right? You're pretty much writing alone. And so
Yes.
if you have a hermetic personality and you're not going to go out to socialize with other writers, you're not going to go to events.
Right.
If, for instance, you can't get yourself invited to Ramesh's parties,
Yes.
then stay in Iowa.
But that's a good example right there. Like Chris and I knew of one another through the business. I didn't meet him until a chance Hollywood party where we ran into one another. And now, again, Chris and I have a monthly lunch. Chris and I are talking right now here. Chris and I share information with one another. That wouldn't have existed if I didn't go to that party the night I went to that party. Because again, I'll always remember Chris because I've heard his name. But like now there's a personal connection only because I live in LA. Now, Could I have done that through social media? Maybe. I could. And if you don't live in LA, that is another way. Like you could, you know, ask a question. And by the way, you're very gracious with your time on the Inside Pitch, and you do interact with like writers, and you give them feedback on their material. By the way, the head of story from William Morris is like doing that for you on Facebook. That's huge. Like that's like the biggest screenwriters in Hollywood get his attention. So that's an example right there of you couldn't have done that 20 years ago, but you can now thanks to social media. So that's another example of a way to network and connect with people that you couldn't have enjoyed, and we didn't 20 years ago. That's another way. And conferences, yeah. Conferences, if you're here in town again, or if you're in some place where there's a writers conference and there are speakers and there's like coffees, yeah, that's how you meet people. You meet people through those events, and sometimes you'll click with them, sometimes you won't, but like it's another way to try. All these are ways to try that you should, if you're really, you know, dedicated. You won't try any one of those, you'll try all of them.
Right. And you know, also I think that it's not just about connecting with people who are in the business. It's also connecting with people who are where you're at, right?
Yes.
Like people who are in your class, which
Yes.
by the way, you can do. So for example, through the Inside Pitch, if there are people who you think are smart or people that you're kind of jibe with, you can reach out to them and say,
For
hey,
sure.
you know, why don't we swap scripts, or why don't we do this, or why don't we start a little writers group, you know, where we could meet once a month on Zoom. Take advantage of the technology and don't live in a vacuum, because the people that you're with today, a lot of those people will then end up perhaps moving on, like you met all of those people way back. And, you know, people that I knew are now running studios, or they're showrunners, or they're producers. You know, when I first got to ICM, one of the readers there was the guy that wrote the last, I think he wrote and directed the last Spider-Man movie. He did the I don't know. Anyway.
No. Yeah, but by the way,
I mean, like, you know, huge stuff. And, you know, these are people who are nobodies. You know, I used to work with Jillian Michaels. Jillian Michaels, the fitness guru, was an assistant at ICM when I was there, you know, long before she became whatever she became today. So you're
right. You want to meet people who are just as ambitious, just as creative, just as kind of like social as you. Because again, the people that I met when I first came to Hollywood through, you know, my best friend who I went to high school with, he went to Northwestern. I went to University of Miami. So when we came out together, I met his friends from Northwestern who also moved out to make it in Hollywood. Amongst the people who we went to Northwestern with, well, one of them went on to become currently the guy who's running ABC, Craig Irwin. He runs ABC and Hulu. One of them wrote and directed the movie. I'm going to screw it up now. I'll get back to him. One of them was an assistant at Columbia, who's now a big executive at Disney. One of them went on to be on Friends, David Schwimmer. These are all people that were in this group, who all came out and tried to make it together. And, it's some of those people will make it. And, and just because I know those people, it doesn't necessarily mean I call them up and say, hey, will you hire me? But knowing them, being able to get them on the phone, being able to get feedback, advice, all that kind of stuff, it's very helpful. And so, yes, the more social you are, and the more you sort of reach out to people, and again, don't assume that anybody has to help you, because everybody's just trying to do their own thing. Everybody's trying to get by. But if you're helpful and if you're nice and if you're somebody who's friendly, then yes,
and not too flaky,
Yeah. For sure.
I agree. I think it's I think that you can use the technology today to network, even if you're not in LA. All right, so Charlie's asking Charlie for, oh, well, actually, for both of you, which has been the most innovative script you have read in the last 5 years? Oh,
I'm trying to think of what the word innovative means here. Innovative in terms of the structure, the format, the type of like genre. Like, what do we mean by innovative? Like, I'm not sure what that means exactly.
well, I don't know. Yeah, I don't really know what innovative means, but I'll take a stab at the question. I'll take a stab at the question. I can't actually go into details, I guess, but no, I read a script not that long ago. In fact, I think it's in pre-production. Uh, uh, Good story, one character, one character. So innovative in that respect, I would say.
Right.
Kind of a little bit like back rooms a
Okay.
little bit, a little bit like that,
Okay.
for example. So, I guess I would say that was innovative and it was good. I mean, I've read scripts that might, be innovative, but are terrible. So like, who cares, right? You
Yeah,
know,
because you could say innovative, like doing something non-linear, doing
or
something
like,
like
or like Charlie Kaufman, right? A lot
yeah,
of his stuff I would say is kind of innovative.
yeah. And by the way, that's an example. Charlie Kaufman is a great example of what we're talking about fresh ideas. Like, yes, Charlie Kaufman does, being John Malkovich and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and like those are brilliant, interesting, original screenplays. Is that what Hollywood really wants to buy?
Right.
No, but
Uh-uh.
but Charlie Kaufman didn't start out writing those things. Charlie
And
Kaufman
also
was
he's
writing
and
comedy.
and also he's not starting out today.
No,
So,
no.
and this industry has, it is constricting. It's getting harder to get representation,
Yes.
um, just because agents and managers are being more selective because there's fewer jobs out there, so they just can't take on people.
Well, and
Uh,
there's fewer agents and managers. There have been a lot of cuts at a lot of like agencies
well,
and
you know,
management companies. So there are fewer
ICM
people. Yeah.
ICM got eaten up by CAA, right?
Yeah.
Endeavor and William Morris merged. I mean, not yesterday, but still, where there
Yeah.
were once four, now there's just two.
Yeah. There's been a lot of mergers and there's been a lot of
Studios,
yeah, studios,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Exactly.
So it's getting smaller and smaller. Exactly what that means, I, I, I don't know, but I don't know if it's good. All right. When you hear a high concept idea that makes you think, why didn't I think of that? What usually separates it from a premise that's just familiar with a gimmick added? So that's interesting that they're sort of relegating this hook aspect that you and I spoke about,
Right.
like to a gimmick. You
Yeah,
know,
gimmick is kind of like a word that has a negative connotation to it. But
right?
I'll give you an example. Like they've made like 5 or 6 Sharknado movies. Now, I wouldn't have written Sharknado, but there is a novelty to that concept, which is it's a tornado full of sharks and it's kind of campy, and like it became sort of a pop culture, buzzy thing, and like it's so over the top ridiculous, but somebody said, you know what? That's so ridiculous, it just might work, and it did. And like that's lightning in a bottle. You can't always do that. But if we mean by gimmick sounds cheap, right? It sounds like I came up with an angle that's like that's not legitimate. I would say again, like a high concept idea is an idea that makes me want to read it, and if it's a gimmicky, I wouldn't want to read it. If it's gimmicky, that means it is cheap. It's like, yeah, that's just Robin Hood with a woman, so it's Robin Hood, but she's a girl. Maybe, like that's a sex switch, but like, is it enough in and of itself, or is there something beyond that? By the way, that is another way that people come up with ideas, which is do a kind of a gender swap of the character, and that you could come up with ideas that way. But yeah, I would just say gimmick, has a negative connotation. I would just say a twist and a gimmick are two different things. A twist is something that makes something compelling and interesting. A gimmick is immediately you're self-aware that it's cheap and something you're not interested in.
Right. And maybe won't even be able to sustain the concept. Uh,
Right.
Might even sort of fall apart or start to wane by page 39, perhaps, because it might feel one note even.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
all right. So we've got about 10 minutes left, and there was more questions, but I also do want to talk about Script Genius.
Oh, sure.
And some people are asking about it. So why don't we just hit upon that, and then we'll get back to a final few questions.
Sure.
So
So yeah, you want me to I'll tell you why I did it. So when I left Bruckheimer in the middle of the pandemic in 2020. And I hadn't really spent a lot of time on social media, but I had some time. I was looking at social media, and I had noticed that in the screenwriting forums and threads that there were a lot of people offering to be script consultants and read material.
lots,
And
lots.
there were lots, and they were charging pretty big chunks of change. And I was like, who are these people? Because I work in the business. I know who works at studios. I know who, gets movies made. I know who's developing big properties. And none of these people who are charging people are doing those things. And I know what I'm doing for a living. I know who I work with. And I'm like, well, in between screenwriting and producing, because again, those things take time, and making movies, as Chris knows, everything takes a long time. When I have free time, maybe I'll throw my hat into the ring, and I can at least tell people, okay, I don't know what other people's resume or experiences are, but here's my resume. I worked for Jerry Bruckheimer for 30 years. I worked with literally the biggest screenwriters, developing $10 billion worth of motion pictures. That's what I did for the past 37 years. My name's in the credits. You can see my name. So it's like I can't vouch for the other people who are doing this, but I know what it takes to develop those kind of movies, because that's what I did for a living. A, and B, I also sat on the other side of the desk as a screenwriter who sold, movies and TV shows, and did adaptations, and did script doctoring on movies that were being shot. And so my favorite part of the job was always sort of the creative problem solving. How do you address things that are not working in a screenplay? To me, that's a fun thing. And so working with young writers on material in sort of that one-on-one way, I get a real kick out of it. And I really do try to take it seriously, as if, you're Tony Gilroy, you're Aaron Sorkin, you're Craig Mazin, you're, Robert Towne, these people that I've worked with, and say, what are you trying to accomplish? What is the movie you want to make? And how do we get it closer to being something that, you can share professionally? Because that is a process that takes some time. And not everybody has that access to somebody with my experience to kind of read, assess, and be honest about the material. So yeah, I've been doing that for the past 3 or 4 years, and I enjoy it a lot. It's fun.
And this is www.scriptgenius.com. Okay.
www.script-genius.com, because at the time somebody had the one without the dash in the middle of it.
But is that
Yeah.
person really a script genius?
I mean, I know they didn't do what I did for a living. No.
All right.
So, but anyway, yeah. So, and again, I'm always happy to answer questions. I'm on, like Chris, a lot of these sort of Facebook forums and Reddit and things like that. So, when people ask questions, I'm happy to try to help, and as much as I can. And but for people who are maybe a little further along, and one of the things that I do offer, although most people don't take me up on it, is doing sort of like a high concept test drive, which is pitching an idea and trying to figure out, is it an idea worth spending your time on before you write it? Because once you've written it, it's well, if the idea is kind of lacking or something, then we can make it a better script. But that's the thing that's going to get you in the door. And And yeah, I told Chris about this. We're talking about like, maybe trying to come up with like a high concept, class that would help, teach you a little bit more
Like a
about
clinic.
yeah,
Like
what
a
are the
clinic.
ways that you can literally generate those ideas that are going to get people like Chris and people like me, who again do this for a living, so we know what it takes to get our attention. Like, we're uniquely suited to do that because that's, people pay us for that. That's what we do for a living. So, yeah, I mean, I enjoy doing it. I enjoy working with young and upcoming writers, and it's been really cool, working with people and seeing the material really come along, which it does, over time. It's rarely a one and done, right, Chris? I mean, it's rarely like you do one draft and it's like, well, it's ready for Spielberg. It's like,
Nope.
it takes a little bit more than that.
Nope.
But again, if you're serious and if you're patient and if you're focused, you could really make some progress with the material. Yeah.
So you can reach out to Charlie at scriptgenius.com. Also, he is on the Inside Pitch. If you ever,
Yep.
you can always tag him. If you want his specific
For sure.
his specific input. All right, let's go one more question, and then we'll say goodbye.
Sure.
And can you speak about template movies, film scripts that are recycled into new films, like Die Hard or Point Break come to mind? Yeah, I mean, there's like a million kind of Point Break movies that aren't
Yeah.
set, it's just like a completely different world.
The Fast and the Furious started out as a Point Break ripoff.
Okay, there
The
you go.
Fast and the Furious series literally was Point Break in the world of like street racing, and it literally became much bigger than Point Break ever was.
Right,
So I think that goes back to what you and I were talking about, which is the something old, something new kind of thing. Which is
right.
if you have a take on like The Rock, we made The Rock. It's Die Hard on Alcatraz. Weisberg and Cook are the writers who wrote that screenplay. Of course they were aware of Die Hard at the time that they wrote The Rock. It was literally like, okay, what can we do Die Hard in or on? What are, Die Hard on a space station, Die Hard, like, how can you spin it? And there were a lot of, what was the movie with Steven Seagal? He did one. And
Under Siege.
Under Siege. Van Damme, exactly.
Yeah,
it was Under Siege.
Yeah, because something, I just read a script recently that was, I mean, there were like a lot of those kind of Under Siege movies, and I just read one like 2 or 3 weeks ago. I was like, wow, in fact, this is really almost like a story, point by point remake of Under Siege, but just set in a different place.
Right.
Not on a ship, not in the Navy, just somewhere else.
Yeah, and if you can come up with, like, again, a creative twist or variant on a guy behind enemy lines trying to take down the bad guys. I think there was also a Netflix movie that came out not that long ago with was it Taron Egerton and
oh yeah,
it was set in an airport. Yeah.
By the way, that's a really good. It's a real sort of throwback to those movies, and I think it's really good.
Yeah, and by the way, again, if you can come to me with one of those kinds of like movies, but with a really amazing twist on it, great. Like that is what Hollywood would love to read, because it's kind of like something old, something new. I can pitch that. I know what that is. I know what the shape of that is. But you've just come up with a really cool take on it. And if you execute it halfway decently, that's the kind of thing that will get you representation or get you, a sale or an option or something, for sure.
I mean, so I wrote a very long post on the Inside Pitch about a particular trope that Billy Elliot, October Sky, Flashdance, Coda, they're all the same movie.
Yeah.
They're all the same movie, just set in very different worlds.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, my college screenwriting professor said every movie is about who wants to do what and why can't they. And if you think about it, that's kind of true. Every movie is a variant of who wants to do what and what stands in their way. And the more novel the challenge that they're dealing with, and the more interesting the character, and the more entertaining their journey, well, that's how you get a movie made.
Well, there you go. So any parting shots, final advice before we say goodbye?
Yeah, you know what? Perseverance, talent, luck, and just be a decent person. If you have those four things, you know, that's what you need. Every person who breaks through has some version of all of those things put together. You need the talent, you need the luck, you need perseverance to see that through because it's never going to happen on your timeline. And if you're a nice person, well, people want to return your calls and people want to like return your emails and people want to work with you. So those four qualities, very important if you want to work in this business. Yeah.
All right. Well, there you go. You heard it from Charles Vignola. It doesn't come from any higher, more exalted, more informed place. So thank you so much for
Chris
your
had a
time
blast.
today.
Yeah.
This was fun. Thank you to all the Inside Pitch members and those who just maybe stumbled upon this. By the way, if you're not a member of the Inside Pitch, come to Facebook, just look it up, the Inside Pitch, and just let us know that you heard about it here, and you can become a member. It's very simple. You know, we have a very, very low bar, incredibly low bar to become a member of the Inside Pitch. So you and I have to make our next Hugo.
Yes, I'll see you at Hugo's. Of course, we're going to make that. Yeah.
Everybody,
All right, Chris.
Thanks so much, everybody. We really appreciate your time.
Take care. All right.